everybody. Welcome to another episode of Pricing Talk. Today, I've got James Wilton here from Monevate to give him a little bit of introduction before I let him kind of tell a little bit. He's got a great background in consulting, from founding Monevate to McKinsey to SBI to, I'm sorry if I pronounce names wrong, A.T. Kearney, ZS Associates, and more. So we're happy to hear him, and definitely interested to see what he has to say from a pricing consulting perspective. So without further ado, James, thank you. I appreciate you joining me today.
Absolutely. No, happy to be here, Chris. Good to be here.
Well, as I said in the open, I probably can't do your background justice. Can you just maybe give a little insight into your background and how you got into pricing and what you're up to at Monevate?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess starting with my background, it's kind of interesting. I found that nobody in the pricing space almost started off wanting to be a pricing person, right? It just kind of finds you if it's going to find you. But actually, I started off my career. I didn't even necessarily want to be a consultant, right? I left college not really knowing what I wanted to do. I eventually decided upon management consulting as a good prospect because I'd done a lot of science in my degree. Seemed like it was a good fit with analytical skills. Considered myself a decent communicator, so I thought that would fit well as well. So I gave it a shot. Ultimately, found that I really liked consulting. I started my career at ZS Associates, which did a lot of very heavily analytical sales and marketing work, mostly for the pharmaceutical space, actually. Did all of that. That was about 4 years, which took me to the US for the first time. Within there, I went and lived in Chicago for a couple of years. I then went to business school, decided that I wanted to stay in consulting. I did flirt with the idea of going into a different space, but I kind of realized pretty soon on that I'm a consultant and I should stay a consultant. So I decided to stay in there, but I wanted to broaden a bit beyond the sales and marketing start that I had. So I decided to go join A.T. Kearney after that. I was at A.T. Kearney for about 2 years. And honestly, I quite often think that I would probably still be at A.T. Kearney today if it wasn't for the fact that I had my first kid in the beginning of my second year at A.T. Kearney. And, you remember this is like 12 years ago, right? Like things were a little in the management consulting space then. Like it was a mandatory 4-day-a-week travel model.
Yep.
Long story short, I saw my kid on weekends for the first about 9 months of his life, right? And I kind of, I realized that it wasn't sustainable and I had to go find something else to do. But I really identified as a consultant, so I didn't know what else I would do if I looked for something else. I ended up getting headhunted by this internal consulting team for a big company called Reed Elsevier back then. It's called Relics now, but it's a technology and information company. And they own lots of different businesses within there. There's Elsevier and Nexus, these kind of big information companies, which were all moving online and getting into subscription models around that time. And this internal consulting team focused on pricing strategy, which I hadn't done anything of up until this point in my career. But I decided to roll the dice with it because I thought it was a chance to remain as a consultant, have a bit better work-life balance, keep doing something that I liked, even though be able to spend more time at home with my wife and my growing family. And as it happened, right, it turned out the pricing content was just like a light bulb moment for me, really. I hadn't really found that area of consulting up until that point in my career that I got really excited about.
I was just thinking, I think that was about the time that we met too, was kind of, I think you were at the PPS conference I think Vegas or something along those lines. I was trying to piece together where you were in your career when we met, and I think that lines up somewhat with the timeline. I think that's when you were telling me back in the day, so it makes sense too. So perfect. Sorry.
No, I think it was. I think it would have been. Probably would have been late time at Relics at that point. But yeah, I know. I guess for me, pricing was. It turned out to be way more strategic and way more creative than I thought it would be from the outside looking in, I think, which I imagine is probably the same as a lot of people's experience. We tend to think of pricing as being very numerical and dry. But I found I really liked it. I think because of that, I ended up reading around a lot about it. About 3 years into that team, I was leading the team by that point. And after I finished my time there, I stayed there for 4 years. I decided at that point that rather than going into a leadership role within Relics, which was the typical path that somebody coming into would take, I decided that I wanted to go back into external consulting under slightly different terms, right? But focus the rest of my consulting career on pricing. And that's really what I've done ever since. I got deeper and deeper into pricing and deeper into pricing for SaaS and for software specifically. Built a pricing practice for SBI, it's a boutique sales and marketing firm. And then that led to an opportunity to go join McKinsey, where I was brought into McKinsey to lead the pricing service line for Fuel, which was the part of McKinsey that was set up to work with startups and scale-ups and fast-growing tech companies. That was great. I really love that. I mean, I got to work with some really cool companies over that time, and I liked the people I was working with and the way that we did the work. I didn't like the fact that, McKinsey fees being what they are, it made it very difficult for me to do work with all the companies, the sort of growing growth stage companies that I wanted to work with. And I guess, that got, for all the things I liked about it, it got increasingly frustrating. By at the end of my third year there, I decided that it would be a lot easier to do the kind of work I wanted to do with the companies I wanted to work with if I was able to remove the McKinsey fees. So that's really what led me to founding Monevate back in 2021, which was, let's set this up as a, hopefully best-in-class consulting firm that's focused on pricing strategy, but for growth stage companies. So,
and maybe good segue into maybe a little bit more about what you're up to, what you're getting into. And I saw some other stuff you're getting into. Maybe a good point to kind of, dive into that, and then we'll get into some of the other questions I have for you.
Well, yeah, I guess to maybe start at the beginning with Monevate, really. I mean, the idea behind Monevate really originally was that, look, there's this set of these growing companies, mostly something as a service companies, who need help with pricing strategy, right? They build a pricing strategy when they're founded. They haven't usually got expertise to help them do that, so it's a bit, we try to make it work as we can, and then they reach a sort of point where, even if the pricing strategy is not holding them back exactly, it's not helping them grow, right? The things have changed, their objectives have changed, the market's changed, and they need to change it to become the company that they want to become. And of course, as I'm sure Chris, given the area you work in, like a lot of these smaller companies, they don't have a pricing person, right? They don't know, they don't necessarily have the expertise of what a good pricing strategy looks like, or how to transform their existing pricing strategy. So they need help with that. What I found through the work that I've done in the space, right, is that there's the kind of the larger consulting firms who do a lot of work in this space are often just, the fees are too high for these smaller companies. They just can't make it work. So they're left with, there are smaller boutique firms who do work in this space, but I found that they typically take quite a different approach than those larger firms tend to. It's like, not saying it's worse, it's just different.
It's a different model. I mean, they're going after the, million plus in fees. And I mean, that's just kind of my guess, or some of what I'm hearing in the market right now. So, I think we all can see where there's room for everybody with fees that high.
Absolutely. No, it's very different. It is. And I think so what we already saw was there's this opportunity to do work that looks more like something that one of the larger firms would spit out, but be able to make it, flexible and scalable, and, be able to do it at fee levels that these smaller companies can afford. So that's really what we do. I mean, we do pricing strategy transformations and new product strategy designs. Companies that are generally in this smaller space. I mean, companies that probably start about 10 million ARR and scaling up to about, the largest companies we do are probably just knocking on the door of $1 billion, but they're
good size.
Full-time consulting projects. Yeah, they last about 6 weeks to about 12 weeks overall. So that's our bread and butter, I would say. That's what we plan to do. We've recently also launched the Cube, which is a community around pricing strategy in the SaaS space. And I think the idea there is that even though we have tried to serve these smaller companies who don't necessarily have budgets, like there are good many companies out there who need help with this, but don't have budgets for consulting firms at all, right?
Yep.
There's a lot of companies that even we can't help. The idea here is to be able to give them access to other people who are doing the same things as them, so they can share their stories, be able to deliver masterclasses. We hold masterclasses every couple of weeks, and we go deep into a particular pricing topic and give them practical steps on how they can build packaging or change their price metric, get into these quite tactical things that they might need to do. And there's also eventually, we are early stage, but we see eventually there'll be benchmarking, and there'll be ability to download tools and templates to help them build pricing as well. So hopefully it's a way of I think bringing giving help to a wider range of SaaS companies, plus also I think being able to keep a relationship with our clients over a longer period of time as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think too, even from a pricing audience perspective, I know a lot of the pricing people that kind of pick up where you or other consultants are leaving off or are stuck being one person shows, and sometimes no matter how much money they make, I was talking with someone the other day, generating 10 plus million, and he's still, he or she, I'm not going to go into that, but he or she is still like, it's just a one person show, even when they're generating that much money. And, even when you're just doing that, like just some outside advice or picking things up. And, I think my last conversation really kind of hit home, I think, with some people is, look, there's lots we can learn from each other. And so I think with what you're doing and bringing some people and just the more conversations and the little bits everybody can pick up makes us more successful, because it is tough sometimes to get teams on board, even after they spend money with you or another consulting firm. They still necessarily don't have buy-in to pricing, and it may have been a one-off thing. And as much as you may tell them, hey, you need to keep going with this, it's sometimes they struggle to kind of keep pushing the ball forward or keep spending the money or whatever it may be. But maybe we can kind of dive into, some of the SaaS challenges that you're seeing from, companies, startups, maybe talk a little bit and get into the weeds on some of that. So what would you say kind of is the most common, or what are you seeing from companies where they're having challenges or struggling with right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think, I guess first thing to call out is, as I say, like most of the companies that we will help end up in that situation I just described, right? The kind of the idea that what got here isn't going to get us there, so we need to change our pricing strategy, but we don't necessarily know what we should be changing it to or how we should change it, right? And that's the thing. And of course, pricing. It is risky, but I think the perception is it's even more risky than it actually is as well. So they're very, very hesitant to make those changes and need a really robust fact base and to be able to feel good about making the changes.
Yep.
So I think there's a few things that frequently crop up that they need help with, right? And the first one, honestly, is it sounds so obvious, if you like, but it's actually it's something that a lot of companies don't think about. Is just to get clarity on what their objectives are for this new pricing strategy, right? I think like it's so funny. I feel like it doesn't really happen with any other area, but people tend to think like, we'll just build a pricing strategy. They don't think like, I need to build a pricing strategy that will help us do this.
Yep.
You know what I mean? They tend to also ask questions like, if I'm in this particular space, what's the best style of pricing strategy for me to use? And I think the first thing we have to kind of get across with our clients is that, like, you could be if you've got two different companies that have exactly the same product, exactly the same market, and everything is the same across these, except they're trying to achieve different things. Their pricing strategy should be completely different, right? And that's incredibly important. And it's usually not that they're just trying to achieve one thing, right? They're often trying to achieve a mix of things, which is very important, right? So it might be that I'm mostly really want to drive revenue growth, but also I need to keep my margins above this level. So it's kind of a constraint on that first objective.
Yep.
And just getting that clarified, right? It's so helpful for understanding what you can build and also evaluating the pricing strategy that you build afterwards, because you can check off, like, is this going to actually help us do the things that we need to do? So I think that's the first thing. And then getting into the actual mechanics of what that pricing strategy looks like, you're usually thinking about, firstly, I guess the revenue model, right? Is this, a lot of our businesses are pure subscriptions, but of course, usage-based models are very prevalent now. And there's this whole area of hybrid, right? When you end up with usage-based subscriptions, or there's a kind of a classic subscription component. And then there's also a usage-based, extra level on top of it as well. Spend a lot of time on the packaging, on the price architecture. So, choosing the price metric or metrics that you're scaling price for your different customers, and how does that price scale? And of course, we get into price level as a lot as well. I mean, there's a lot of companies that come into these projects knowing that they're underpricing. So, they're getting all this feedback from the market that says, you're really good value for money, and we the prices by 5% last year and we got zero churn. So they know there's something extra that they could charge. They don't know where the ceiling is. So it's, how do we figure out how much we can actually charge for the value that we're creating?
Yeah. And I wonder, are you seeing it all where companies are wanting to do certain things that they're not even capable of billing for? Like, it seems like a lot of these companies are wanting to do certain things, but they just don't even have the systems to go out and execute on the billing for it, because it's usage based and stuff is great. But a lot of these companies, I feel like they try to do it, or they want to do it, and then they can't actually execute on it. So they go down this long path, and they're like, well, after all, we can't even do that even if we wanted to.
Right. No, that's true. I mean, I think, especially with these pricing models that are quote unquote trendy, like usage-based pricing to an extent, right? And some of the other they're coming out now, but it's you end up with a lot of guidance from the industry saying usage-based pricing is great. You should be doing usage-based pricing, and in many cases that's true, right? There's a lot of advantages to usage pricing, very growth-oriented. It helps you capture value that some of the more traditional measures can't, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's not right for everyone, right? Like there's a lot of places we've seen these companies where usage actually is not that linked to value, so it's not the best thing for you to be setting price on anyway. So maybe it's not the right decision. And then, as you say, Chris, right? Even if it is the right thing, you have to think about, can I execute on it? And usually moving to usage-based pricing is a completely different selling motion for the sales teams. Often usage-based metrics are very unpredictable, right? So you're going to sell to a new customer. You don't necessarily know what their usage is going to be. So it's quite difficult to be able to start a conversation about how much you're going to end up paying for this. And then, as you say, right, then you need to be able to measure the usage. You need to be able to report on the usage. You need to be able to potentially have prompts that are going to get you to come back and upsell the customer when you do cross thresholds or whatever else is in your structure. So there's this whole supporting infrastructure that you need. And honestly, if you don't have any of that right at the beginning, I'd say there is, even if you mobilize the whole organization around it and push really hard, that is probably at least the 6 months path, the implementation from that, which is okay in some cases, right? Sometimes there is a long timeline that people are willing to spend the time there. But if you're, we also often speak to clients who say, we want to change our pricing strategy and we want to start seeing impact this year. And if that's the case, then those larger transformations are not necessarily the best way to go.
Yeah. Well, I think too, you hit on the sales team, right? Like, can they actually sell this, or, what's the repercussions on the commission structure? And there's so much stuff that goes into all this stuff that I'm sure you have to kind of educate the clients, and it's going to require a lot more work than just flipping a switch and, handing them a new comp structure and saying, okay, here you go sell this in a completely different way than you're used to.
Okay.
Question for you. So right now, I don't know what you're seeing, but right now I'm seeing a lot of the growth in the pricing space coming from like PE firms, VC firms. It seems like, at least from what I'm seeing, is that PE firms are now including kind of pricing into their into kind of their playbook when they make an acquisition, pricing where it was kind of an afterthought or a nice to have. These companies are now kind of pushing for it. Are you seeing that with kind of some of your business getting kind of coming from kind of maybe some lower level PE firms, or not lower level PE firms, but smaller clients, given what you were talking about, where kind of your market is, or kind of what are you seeing right now with things?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's honestly, it's a lot of I'd say the majority of the project opportunities that we get to work on these days come through a PE firm or a VC firm, right? Because it's what you said, I think, is, in my experience at least, completely true, Chris, is that pricing strategy transformation is often a part of the value creation thesis coming in, right? It's not a sort of an afterthought anymore. It's often the case that they see there is a big opportunity to change the way they price, right? And you see varying degrees of that, but there's lots of companies where they're in a B2B model and they haven't really got many levels of price differentiation across their companies. They maybe got like 3 packages at a flat price, right? So you've got these huge customers coming in and buying it for a price level that would be appropriate for a much smaller company. So sometimes it's super obvious like that. But I think they also see now the VC and the PE firms far more aware of what those pricing levers are and spotting the potential for the pricing strategy transformation, even when it's a little bit more nuanced. So I think, yes, they're seeing that, right? They're definitely seeing those opportunities and doing more pricing work. And I think what's going along with that, I think is super interesting, is I see a lot of PE firms and VC firms being very interested in finding pricing people who can not only sometimes lead the pricing strategy transformation, but can manage it afterwards, right? I actually have a couple of close PE contacts now who are, made it very clear to me that they really, really, really need to find those best-in-class commercial leaders, pricing strategy leaders who can plug into these different portfolio companies and manage that. And I think it's interesting, right? Because you go back a few years, and I think people had a perception that pricing as a career was kind of limited, right? Like you can maybe get up to a sort of director, senior director behind some VP, but that's as high as you can go. And I think now there are a lot more senior pricing roles, and it's seen as far more of a strategic lever rather than a tactical lever. But the issue is that I think for the PE firms and the people trying to hire these guys, it's seen as a bit of a unicorn find, right? Because as we all know, right, pricing is really niche. There aren't that many people who know pricing really well. Those people who do know pricing well, it's still even rarer within that to find somebody who knows the strategic side and the operational side. And then you add that together with somebody who has executive presence and is able to, collaborate across these different functions and get them all working together, as you need to do within pricing. It's a difficult thing to do. So they're really always on the lookout for those people who can marry all of those things.
Yeah. I've seen the same thing. I've got some PE firms that have come to me after making acquisitions and kind of are now pushing that. And it seems like more and more of my clients are kind of PE owned, and they're pushing, I'd say they're keeping a lot of the pricing market alive from a perspective. There's been a lot of growth in this space, and so where do these people go? And now with kind of PE firms, I think we would be in a pricing professionals, or the industry as a whole would be in a much worse position, kind of with the downturn in the economy. Had there not been for this growth in kind of roles being created by these PE and VC firms, I think without it, we'd be seeing a lot of pricing people without work. But yeah, it's interesting to see kind of the shift from afterthought to now, a part of their playbook when they're coming in and addressing pricing. And I've seen, even before, as you were talking about kind of capping out, now I'm seeing these PE owned companies now promoting people to keep them to a VP level, which was probably unheard of five years ago. Before, they would have just said, thanks, see you later, we'll replace you. But now they understand kind of the value of finding that right person, what they can do, and they're now willing to to spend more to keep that, which is kind of interesting.
Oh yeah, no. So I was curious actually what you're finding they're looking for in these as well, because I've spoken to a lot of these guys, and they're often looking for somebody who has both consulting experience and also operational pricing experience when they're looking for the people to put in those roles. Is that consistent with what you're finding?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now, I'd say when I first started it, a lot of it was more MBA, like, oh, we want someone with a top MBA, and that's kind of fallen off. And now we want someone with a mix of in-house and consulting experience. And so, and kind of leads into the next thing, but I'm seeing a lot more of, and I'm kind of advising more of these consultants, like, hey, if you're going to go the path and, do what you've done and you want to have a career in consulting, that's great. But if you want to get in-house and you want to grow that way, like, you need to find that right exit for you, because until you have that mix of in-house and consulting, you're not going to get like to that next level or those top roles. You're not going to be invited in, because the PE firms and then the VC firms, they want that mix of consulting and in-house. I think from, probably what, about consulting, the ability to kind of put it together and the presentation and just kind of that experience is probably the most in-demand skill or experience that's being requested, which, I think is a little bit shift in how pricing people may need to kind of shift what they're thinking and maybe do, 2 years at a consulting firm or, a year at least, because now it's almost becoming like an MBA box at some of these places. You have to go check the box while you're making money at the same time versus, paying for the MBA. So I think it gives pricing people a little bit kind of a different feel. But, what are your thoughts on kind of the consulting world and maybe, getting into it or how to get into it, or maybe just kind of continuing that frame of thought?
Yeah, so I think, getting into consulting, I mean, I think, obviously somebody who spent like 20 years in the consulting industry, obviously I'm a fan. I do enjoy it. I think it's a really good area to get into. I think partly because there's a lot of variety, right? You're constantly solving problems in lots of different areas. So there's a lot of benefits that way. I think sometimes consultants get tarred with a brush of like, oh, you're just kind of recommending the outcomes, and then you kind of get to walk away and don't actually have to do the work to do it, which is true to an extent, right? If you're not actually following through the implementation, but word gets around, like word of mouth is everything in consulting. And if you're constantly like recommending strategies which aren't going to get implemented or just kind of stay in a deck in somebody's desk, you're not going to have a successful career there. So
I may have seen one of two of those in my time.
It does happen. And look, it does happen. I mean, there's a million reasons why something you recommend may not get implemented. And I think you speak to any consultant, they're always going to have a couple of situations when they can point to, we did this and it didn't really go anywhere. But usually the good consultants feel pretty bad about that, right? That's not why they got into it. They want to see their ideas and their work get implemented. So you have to be able to recommend stuff that's implementable, and you have to be able to get the change manager around it to be able to inspire the organization to actually make the change. And I do think, honestly, even if you're an operational pricing person and you want to remain as a pricing leader within an organization for the rest of your career, I think it's still very useful to go and do consulting for a while. And I think that's mainly because I think there are going to be some skills that consulting is going to teach you, which you're not going to be taught to the same extent if you stay within those roles. Like, for example, I think building a pricing strategy, right? You really need very strong conceptual problem solving skills, be able to, step back, think about lots of different options, evaluate them, manage the change through that. Yep. Not to say that you won't get the chance to do that kind of thing in an operation role, but you won't get a chance to do it across so many different situations and so quickly.
Yep.
And if you want to be able to create a best-in-class pricing strategy, being able to do that is super, super important. Plus, also, most consulting firms put a lot of emphasis on communication as well, right? There's that kind of older adage that, it takes you 20% of the time to find the answer, and then the remaining 80% is communicating it. And that's often used, again, as like a brush to beat consultants with and say, you're spending your time on stuff that's not valuable. But like the communication is so important, because you can get the right pricing strategy, but nobody may believe it's the right pricing strategy. So you have to be able to take them on the journey and make them understand what the different options are and, how this option works. That can be very difficult within these kind of quite complex pricing strategies. And then kind of close the door on the decision making across all these areas so that everybody knows not only why we picked the option that we did pick, but why we didn't pick all of those other things that we could have done. That's incredibly important when, inevitably you're going to roll out your pricing strategy. At some point, some sales rep is going to have a difficult conversation around the pricing strategy, and they're going to say, why didn't we go in that direction? You have to have that answer, right? The communication skills are all the pieces that allow you to do that. I think the other thing that consulting gives you is just a lot of experiences across a lot of different spaces. I think if there was one, I guess it's a criticism. It's not meant to be a criticism of like, you guys should have done this but didn't. It's more just, you don't have this, is if you're a operational pricing person and you stay in the same role for a long time and you've only seen the stuff that's in your lane, obviously you can look to pricing strategies that other industry segments are using, but you only get to see the ones that are transparent, right, and laid out there. If you're in a consulting role, you get to see a lot of different ideas from lots of different spaces across lots of different areas, and then you can start to cross-pollinate ideas from other areas, right? Like maybe in this particular space, you only see two major variants of a pricing strategy, and it feels like that's all we can possibly do. But if I look over here, there's this other idea which I can kind of bring here, and it creates something new and different. You might not get there if you didn't have those experiences in those other places to start to pull that over from.
Well, and that's a great point. And going back to what people are asking for, people are getting penalized for staying in their role for too long because they're not seeing enough different things. They're not having to drive change at different organizations and different companies. So, where once that was like a badge of like, hey, I stayed at IBM for 30 years. That is now like, I'd say kind of 5 years, and you start to get dinged for it. Like they want to see you moving every 2 to 3 years, and they want you to have experience driving change at different organizations. Because to your point, if you just stay in one place, you're seeing, you've already built the relationships with the people, you're seeing the same pricing, you're just making tweaks to it, and as the company's progressing, changing things versus having to come in, having to create that strategy, having to build those relationships. And so you're starting to see that too within just the normal career path of pricing people. If you don't move, it is now going to start becoming a deterrent from you getting jobs, which is, I don't think has ever been the case. 5-10 years ago, it was, oh, this person moved around too much, and now it's, they haven't moved around enough. It's like, okay, well, when did that change happen? So, and maybe for, kind of on the other side of things, consultants or here, let me take a step back and ask the question. Since you've been in consulting for so long, a pricing professional, is in their career, how best to get into consulting, or how would you go about doing it if you're 4 to 6 years in your career? What is that path? Maybe, I'd say maybe the MBA kind of leads you into the consulting, or it may give you more opportunity. Whereas, it used to be consulting, then MBA, then back to consulting and or in-house. How would you, recommend people try to maybe break into consulting, if that's the right word?
Yeah, I think the MBA is a really good way of doing it, right? It's just kind of a natural career switching avenue. And obviously you have all the resources there and the connections that will help you get into a consulting firm. So I think that is a very good way of doing it if you're able to. I do think though as well, I mean, it's interesting the shift that's happened in the consulting world the last couple of years. when I started consulting, like the message that I was given then was, if you want to become a senior person in a consulting firm, you have to do an MBA at some point. So like I kind of joined my first consulting firm, and I'm like, oh, I guess I'm going to do an MBA at some point. It was kind of written into the script for what I would do. It's not the case anymore. I think there is now, and I saw that at McKinsey as well. I mean, they've really now, it's very common for business analysts to come into McKinsey straight out of college, do that for a few years, become a senior business analyst, and then get their engagement manager promotion directly from that without doing an MBA. And that wouldn't have happened 10 to 15 years ago.
Well, I mean, they don't need to pay for it, and they get the person continually working there. It kind of, I mean, it seems like maybe that was kind of the switch, is like, well, we keep them, we don't risk losing them, and we can just keep them moving up the ladder.
I think so. I mean, I'm sure that was a big part of it. I think from an economics perspective, I think it makes a ton of sense for the consulting firm. I think also I think that what was pushing them in the other direction before is, I think there's also something in consulting is kind of the gray hair factor, right? Which, feels very different when you actually have the gray hair. But it's like the idea that clients look for people who have, who are very seasoned and have, stood in their shoes and, can say like, hey, I have 15 years experience doing this, versus a business analyst in a consulting firm who can say like, I've got 3 years work experience, right? And, I understand where that comes from, but I think practically, if you're hiring the right people, being a good consultant is not really about having done everything, seen everything, right? Because you have partners and stuff in the consulting firm who've done that and can bring that to it. Yep. If you're sort of you're working in it, then having really strong problem-solving skills and communication skills and being a really fast learner like goes a really long way. So I don't think that you necessarily need an MBA or need to be a certain age to be an effective engagement manager, right? You can do that very effectively in your mid-20s if you're focused on the right things.
I'm saying that, I mean, maybe it's the same thing going on all over, is that now I don't know what you're seeing, but I think there's kind of a reverse ageism going on or just maybe it's ageism. Like, people are wanting more junior people, yep. Which to me is sometimes a little confusing. Like, you wait, for the same money, you want less experience. But I'm not sure what you're seeing with clients, but yeah, where you used to have gray hair and be a little older, I think people are giving, younger, more junior people, I think maybe a little bit more respect early on, versus they had to, you had to maybe, have sat behind a desk or done something for a certain amount of time before you were, given that level of respect. I don't know what you're seeing as well.
I think it's probably true. I think people are being more respectful of younger people earlier, as long as they can sort of demonstrate their effectiveness in their roles. I think, honestly, there is a perception, I think, that with older professionals, like once they get to a certain age or have done something a certain way for a long time, kind of the die is set, and they'll be less receptive to new ideas or be able to. And I think a lot of organizations kind of want to find people who are smart, but are also open to learning new things and changing the way that they do things. And I don't know this for a fact. I suspect that a lot of companies will kind of go for younger people because they think they're going to be able to mold them more.
But that's a great point. I mean, for people that maybe are a little later in their career, like taking on those new analytical stuff, adding that stuff, and maybe moving around in your career probably helps you, at least in my opinion, because if you're just sitting there and you've got Excel or whatever it is, and you're not picking up the new stuff, I think your guess is probably close to the right one of like, hey, they may be a little bit in the old school way of thinking. So, for those of you that are out there and like, hey, I'm not getting as much consideration because of my age, maybe it is trying, adding some of those new skills or putting some more of those things, or putting a new program on your resume. And still, I hate buzzwords on resumes, but putting still eager to learn or something like that may help with recruiters that are just purely dredging on how much experience you have, which is just crazy, I think, to me, because pricing is too about, how much you've seen, how many times have you seen the same problem, and, you've taken your lumps, and sometimes I think know what is the wrong way to do it. And you've maybe made those mistakes. And I tell my clients, sometimes you're paying for their mistakes, because now, they know not to do that, or that's not going to work in this, in this situation. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is a challenge with coming into the consulting firms from the outside, right? Is that, I think, you say you've been in an industry for about 15 years, you're relatively senior, right? Coming into a consulting firm from the outside, you can't really walk into a sort of a senior role that's kind of the level of seniority you are right now, because there's a certain amount of consulting skills that you need to build just through the more junior roles, right? Like it's just practically difficult to come in to a consulting firm as anything higher than an associate unless you already have consulting experience and you've led projects and managed those relationships and that side of things. So I think you have to kind of, to your point, you have to accept that that's going to happen. And I agree. I think sort of demonstrating, let me step back. I think a lot of more seasoned individuals who got to where they are because they know a lot of stuff, the sort of temptation is to sort of come into those interviews and say, like, I know this, this is the way that I do it, etc. Being very sort of, look at all this stuff that I ever do. Whereas actually probably a better message for a company that knows that you're going to be taking kind of a step down in seniority to do this, probably better to do with look how much I was able to learn in this space of time. Look how open I am to learning new things and building new skills. I imagine that's going to resonate better if you're trying to get into those kinds of roles.
So I may have a crazy idea here, and feel free to steal it or smile and nod to it. I mean, it almost seems like there's an opportunity for like a consulting MBA where maybe they're coming in at a little bit more of a junior role and are learning for 2 years, and they're kind of bringing their experience to a consulting firm with the understanding of like, hey, I may, there isn't maybe as much of the title dispute and or like there's an agreement. Hey, look, I'm not going to be making what I was making before, and I'm fine to do it for 2 years to gain the experience at a consulting firm. But I don't know, that just top of mind. I don't think I'm going to change the consulting world, but I think there is something there, because I think more people that are experienced in their career are interested in consulting, than I'm ever seeing. But it is tough to break into something. I know I tried to at one point, and I was told it was a 50-50, and they didn't think I could sell. They didn't think I could sell well enough, which is kind of funny given what I went into. So I'll say they were wrong from that point of view. But it is one where it is a little bit challenging when you are, a few roles in, or, I think maybe past that, I don't know, 6-year mark or something like that into your career. So maybe the MBA is probably our recommendation at this point. Any last things or thoughts from our conversation or anything? I really appreciate the time. I think there's a lot of great advice and insights for people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What were my final thoughts to you, really? I mean, I think it's, I know if there was somebody who was watching this and sort of thinking about whether they should think about getting into pricing consulting, I guess I would say I would very strongly encourage it. I think consulting SSA is a great profession to be in anyway. There's a lot of variety. I think for me, pricing consulting within that has just been so rewarding because I feel like it uses your whole brain, right? You do have to have that very kind of classic pricing, analytical and numerical side of it, but you also have to sometimes just really put yourself in the mind of the customer and think about, psychologically, how am I going to react to seeing these two things laid out in these different ways, and what am I going to choose, and doing the more conceptual stuff around that. I think it's always very rewarding. I think no two situations are the same. And I think if it's, I think even if you are going to do it for a couple of years, it would definitely be something that would be worth thinking about.
I mean, you got me thinking. I was kind of mentally criticizing my kids' soccer pricing for they were trying to incentivize people to sign up earlier, but both my kids' ages sold out within like hours. And I'm like, really? You're offering a discount for paying early when you're selling out these ages? I wanted to send an email and be like, hey, just some helpful advice. You know, you don't need to discount for signing up early. If you're selling out, you should be increasing the price. But if my kids want to keep playing, I'll happily take the lower cost.
Not the best pricing strategy.
No. I mean, I'm sure most pricing people, like, you see that stuff. I wanted to create a social media one for sharing bad pricing strategy or mistakes and stuff like that, but probably could get in trouble for that. So, all right. Well, hey, thank you for your time again. You know, love to have you back at some point. You know, hey, everybody check out kind of, you know, what James is up to and what he's doing. Follow him. You know, I think too on LinkedIn, and you know, appreciate you watching. If you have any questions too, you know, for James or I, you know, feel free to leave them in the comments, and you know, we'll do our best to maybe, you know, get back to you. I'll definitely reply and try to help out with where I can. And so I appreciate everybody taking the time, and thanks, James.
Absolutely, thank you, Chris.